another world, another time, in the age of wonder.
You are listening to the Dark Crystal Minute.
And begin all the same. Sometimes good, sometimes bad.
And now once more the world must undergo a time of testing.
It is time to return to the castle.
There is much to be learned, and you have no time.
And here's your hosts, Philip Mitchell and JM Prater. Hello and welcome to the Dark Crystal Minute. This is your minute-by-minute discussion on the cult classic film, The Dark Crystal. I'm your host, Philip Mitchell, and I am from Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast.
And I am JM Prater. I am the founder and co-host of Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, and Shoulder of Orion, the Blade Runner podcast.
Now, before we go into discussing this particular minute of the Dark Crystal, we are up to minute 7. Jamie, I would actually want to ask, I don't think we've sort of talked about this in previous minutes, but yeah, I mean, you do a couple of podcasts of yourself. I guess, you know, for any of the listeners that were interested, I just want to know more about what you do, Jamie. I just want to know what your role is and what these the two podcasts that you're working on with Perfect Organism and Shoulder of Orion is all about.
Well, Perfect Organism is really the only dedicated alien podcast there is. There's a couple other podcasts here and there, and they cover Alien versus Predator or a little bit of Predator, but really when I started the Perfect Organism, I looked around to see, is there anyone else who has a dedicated alien podcast? And there was none. And I've been a huge fan of Alien since I was probably 12 or 13 in the mid 80s. And as you know, I've always been a follower. I've always been involved in groups and all that type of thing. And when it was announced that Neil Blomkamp was going to do an alien film, that's not happening anymore. My excitement, the idea that I'd see Ripley again on screen, I mean, I was like, oh my God, I got to get more involved. So I did some research, and I found out that there wasn't really no podcast, so I started it. And the birth of Shoulder of Orion is the Blade Runner podcast is very similar. That's actually very new, although by the time our listeners hear this, it won't be as new. But at the moment, it's very new. And again, I looked around to see who has a Blade Runner podcast, and there are a lot of podcasts who talk about Blade Runner, or they have an episode about Blade Runner, but there's no podcasts that are devoted to it. So again, Blade Runner, like Alien, is a part of my life. It's something that I live and breathe. It's something that I've been a fan of since I was a teenager. And I thought, hey, this is the time to capitalize on that and to kind of take the market share of Blade Runner. And with the movie coming out, I felt like it was the best time to do it. So here I am.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear. I mean, it's also, very similar, I guess, to myself as well. When I originally started the Trial by Stone podcast, there was a lot of podcasts, that I listened to, and there was, I've always had a thought every now and then of, would like to try and give this podcasting thing a go, and then I knew, and this was sort of at the time when the Dark Crystal was sort of slowly coming back, and they had just brought out the darkcrystal.com website, and this is around the time where they had this first big contest, the Author Quest, which just sort of finished up, and then announced the winner for Joe, who won the Author Quest, and again, I sort of went through iTunes just to see if there was any Dark Crystal podcasts out there, and yeah, there wasn't any, and I thought, this would be kind of an interesting sort of show to actually try to attempt to do just a very Dark Crystal-centric podcast only. I know there's quite a few like Muppet podcasts out there, which is awesome, but I don't know. I think I feel more closely to the Dark Crystal as a film, and so like in the first episode, when I was able to interview Joe about winning the contest, and him writing the young adult novel for the series that was sort of in a way almost like rebooting, sort of reestablishing the Dark Crystal again. And so once I got that first episode out, and I sort of got a good positive reaction, and I thought, oh, okay, this could lead somewhere. And I mean, there was something that I thought, I'll start off doing a year's worth of episodes, see how I go, and sort of built up the audience here and there, and there's then just kept making them. And I mean, I must admit, early in 2017, I was sort of a bit unsure about what the future of the franchise was going to be after the books and the comic book series, The Power of the Dark Crystal, that was happening. And but then when they announced that the Netflix series, The Age of Resistance, that's really changed everything, not only for Dark Crystal but for the podcast as well. So I mean, which is fantastic. So having a show like the Dark Crystal Minute is such a fantastic opportunity to sort of look back into the film, in this minutia sort of detail, that most probably casual audiences probably would be like, oh, that's kind of cool, and move along, sort of thing. But with a film like The Dark Crystal, it's something that I felt really deserved that sort of minute by minute treatment. So which is very exciting, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember too, before we met, and they were announcing all the contests, and I did the exact same thing you did. I was like, there needs to be a Dark Crystal podcast.
Yeah.
And I was looking all around, and I typed it in, and all of a sudden, their Trial by Stone comes up. I'm like, oh my God, there is one. And then I contacted you, and the rest is history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I remember. Yeah, like I think you messaged me either through Facebook or I don't know how you I can't remember how you contacted me, but yeah, and then you're like, hey, I just want to chat over Skype about the Dark Crystal, and then we sort of go on Skype, and we just really hit it off, and we've been best friends ever since. And I mean, we met for the first time when I went over to the US for Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim.
Yeah, which was awesome.
Yes, it was. Yeah, great time. And and we're still here, all these years later. So it's just a very exciting time for fandom, with everything that's been happening. So yeah. All right. So without further ado, we'll get into the seventh minute of the Dark Crystal Minute. So overall in this minute, we're still getting more of the narration as Jen is playing with the fur car, which then sort of leads to Jen running up to the Valley of the Mystics. It's dark and stormy, and going to see his master, essentially. So sort of the overall, I guess, minute of for this episode. I guess the thing about the start with Jen, playing the fur car. Another thing that sort of crossed my mind is, I wonder what song that he's playing, like whether, because I sort of had this feeling whether this song could potentially be, the song of the Gelflings, that whether the master taught him to play this particular song, and it's like the song of the Gelflings, or I don't know, that sort of thing. And that sort of came to my mind whether that could potentially be a Gelfling theme for when we see the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance.
I was just thinking the same thing. Absolutely. That would be interesting. That would be great if they used that theme. It would create a whole new theme for the show. I can't imagine they won't do something like that,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like it's right there, so I mean, there's lots of possibilities. I mean, whether he's singing, or playing the song of the Gelflings, or mystic centric song. I mean, it could be a mystic theme, but I mean, you do hear the mystic theme later on in the film. So it was just just something that sort of came to my mind. And just I mean, it's almost like the moment is very sort of ominous, I guess, in a way that I felt very creepy. That you're hearing the innocence of Jen playing with the fur car, playing the song, high pitched sort of tune, I guess, in a way, while you're hearing the mystics humming, that deep resonance that, I mean, sort of leading to, it's going to be nighttime. And yeah, I just wanted to know, just your thoughts, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those scenes where um it's a lot of what what the narration is like, they kind of, when the film opens, um it shows the castle, then it shows the Valley of the Mystics, and they're each kind of settled in their own way, and then a storm comes through, and it's kind of like everything's about to change, and that's what storms bring. Storms bring change. And so where Jen was, playing, sitting there naked in that beautiful pond area, all of a sudden a storm comes through, and he's even looking around, kind of like, "What? I don't understand." Um, and then obviously he runs back to the Mystic Village. But yeah, it's a very interesting kind of quick series of events where the storm represents so much more than just a storm.
Yeah. And also, like, I mean, again, with the detail, I mean, we sort of talked about in the previous episode, you see this little creature that's watching Jen play with the fur car, and he sort of hides away. But like in the background,
Yeah.
like, I mean, just again, like with the set design, you see sort of like I'm just trying to think the right term. Oh, in the background, there's like a big wheel in the waterfall.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
like one of those it's one of those things that you see at a mill, like a wood mill. I can't remember what those are called, but yes.
Yeah. I just found it again, just sort of another interesting sort of element, incorporating that, whether that was something that was, potentially built by the Mystics or even the Gelflings. I mean, yeah, it's just sort of
Yeah.
just another level of detail that they put into, and I just love that little squirrel little creature that we see in the next shot. It's
Oh
like
yeah,
so
totally.
cute. I think I remember I even did like a video on Instagram that just, it was just like a loop of that little creature going back and forth. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. So it's interesting to watch Jen. You see him kind of running back, and all of what they've done. Um, that whole storm is essentially in a studio. And it's one shot. There is one shot of what probably is some type of human running through grass, and then on the set itself, there's probably a very tiny person in the costume. But generally, but all that stuff, all the wind, the lightning, everything is in a studio, and it's absolutely amazing. Just the level of detail, how much it went. This is just moments. It's moments, but the level of detail that went into these moments is, I can't fathom it.
Yeah, and like even like the detail. I mean, it with Jen, like something I didn't never really thought of as a kid, and until now, just the there's actually highlights in his hair, the blue highlights, and as well
Yeah.
as on his forehead as well. Which I mean right now, like I find that really interesting. How, what was sort of the ideas, I guess, to incorporate that. And I mean, I had a look at the Dream Fast in the Dark Crystal experience, and sort of looked into what people were sort of chatting about the blue, and it seems like the blue, there was like some early sort of concept sketches of Jen that had the very blue face Gelfling creature. So whether it was just like elements from the early concepts, or yeah, it's just really interesting to see things that we don't think about as a kid, but then when we're rewatching these films, that we just get this extra bit of detail that we sort of never really thought about. It could, all those things, or it could be something to do with the lighting that sort of enhanced it a bit more. Because I know, with the film, that sort of had a bit of that filter, that sort of color filter, like a faint color tint to most of the scenes
Mm-hmm.
with the dark crystals. So yeah, it's just a lot to really. So I mean, there probably isn't a canonical sort of reasoning. I mean, if we're thinking canonically, I mean, the only thing I could think of is whether this is just part of the Gelfling tribes. So I think this is something that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's like
Yeah.
maybe it's depending on where you're born into. That's what you look like. My thought the whole time, because I noticed this years ago, because
Yeah.
I have the making of the Dark Crystal book, and they show images and it's drawings and actual puppets with this blue, and I've noticed it,
Yeah.
and I thought maybe it was for aesthetic reasons because of his hair, and maybe his hair blends in a little bit better at his hairline. Where if it's darker, you're not paying attention to it because it just looks normal. Whereas if it was just a normal light color, it might draw attention to the hairline. So with the darker color, you don't even think about it. That's what my thought was, but who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of possibilities. Yeah. And again, still continuing on with sort of the spirals of, especially with the Valley Mystics, as we, with that shot of him running and you see the stone, that's all very circular and spirals and all that kind of stuff. So it's still sort of following on, with, the theme. And I mean, even with Jen's costume is very, spiral centric as well. Yeah. And I mean, I will say, like, as a kid, this scene sort of really blew my mind as a child, just because, it's a puppet, but it's running. It's like, how is that sort of possible? I mean, later on, we know that it's just a stunt person, wearing the Gelfling sort of costume and having the mask on and whatnot. But yeah, it's just another sort of just example of, just my mind blown, just seeing Jen running in those wide shots. Yeah.
I as a kid too, I never even thought. I mean, I remember seeing the Mystic Village, thinking, how do I get there? I mean, I still, I have not. I mean, even though as an adult, I'm an adult, I know, of course, we all know it's not real. It was made, it was built. But I still kind of go back to the idea that this world was created so beautifully and so perfectly that despite knowing how it was made, I still believe it. I still believe it's real. The fact that those mystics aren't real and they're puppets, I mean, I just, it's just one of those things. And I never even thought of, oh, hey, it's humans running. How do they get the puppet running? It was just Jen running. That's all I saw. Somewhat like when I saw Agra. I just thought, where'd they get that lady? That's what I thought. I would I just thinking, wow, she's weird looking. Wonder where she lives. I just believed that she was real. I had just as much as I believe that Jabba the Hutt is real. And it's just it's a I would say, how do I say this? It's a sign of really good filmmaking.
Yeah. And just, I mean, I think you probably mentioned this before, just the amount of wind that goes with this Valley of the Mystics, and just the wind that's just blowing all over the place. So I'm just looking at the wide, there's this two shot of the Mystics, and just the amount of wind that's just blowing past them. And it's sort of weird. It looks like there's like these purple pink highlights on their strands of the hair. I don't know.
Yes, I noticed that.
Which I would presume that that's probably more of a lighting than an actual, if they actually have it on their hair. But yeah, it's cool. And then the other thing, like, I just sort of looked in the last shot of this minute, in the bottom left corner, you can see sort of like, I'm just trying to think, like a face that's on like a stone. I don't know if you notice on the
yes.
and that almost looks like a an that we see, of course, at the end of the film, an Urskek. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, that was sort of an intentional thing, to sort of either foreshadow or, establish that that the Mystics is one part of the connection. with the Urskeks, with the Mystics and the Skeksis to form into the Urskeks. So yeah, it's just another one of those little things.
Yeah, it's like a little Easter egg. And even this, there's a I don't know what this thing is. It's like a totem that Jen runs by. It says, I have it frozen on the last second or the last second of that minute. And there's a totem in the middle all the way up. It looks like a Skeksis head. Looks just like a Skeksis head.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it actually does. Yeah.
And then it looks like mystic heads around it or something. Maybe not. I can't tell, but certainly that looks like a Skeksis head.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, like them kind of having visual reminders of, that there are other halves of them that aren't as good,
Yeah, because I think at this time they all are very well aware that that the Skeksis is their other half, and I think the Skeksis are very well aware that the Mystics is their other half, so to speak. So yeah, it's just really just interesting, to say the least. So yeah, I think they'll probably wrap it up for this minute, or this episode of the Dark Crystal Minute. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, you can do so at darkcrystalminute@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/darkcrystalminute, or on Twitter at darkcrystalmin. The Dark Crystal Minute is a part of the Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal Podcast Network. So if you're able to give us a 5-star review on iTunes, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time, and come back next time for more The Dark Crystal Minute.